sometimes a step forward and sometimes a step back.
These great brands were built on the foundation of a single meaningful idea. Branding as a way to express your highest value to your best client.
Being able to say no definitively to some piece of work that doesn't necessarily fit your desired profile is super hard.
And there's brands that were doing something other than just selling stuff.
Just because we are positioned and branded in a certain way, it doesn't mean that we don't do other work.
We identified the underlying meaning and we told the story differently. And it made a huge, huge difference.
That even though we can say no to quite a few things, it's not that we're saying no to literally everything else other than what we want to be known for. Welcome to Max Value, the show for business owners and their trusted advisors who are on a mission to maximize their value with business valuation, exit planning, strategy, and amplifying your brand. Today's episode features Robert Friedman, the creative brilliance behind fearless branding. We're going to be talking about how your brand can affect your business value. Robert, welcome.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here.
Thank you for being on. And let's start with the obvious. Let's start with the name, fearless branding. Where does it come from?
I had been working on some really boring packaged goods products in the first part of my career. And I was working on Coffee Mate, and I just was thinking, this is artificial powder, and this is not how I want to spend my life. And so I really started thinking about, do I need to get out of marketing? And then it occurred to me, well, I may be working on Coffee Mate, but somebody else is working on Apple. Somebody else is working on Nike. And there's brands that were doing something other than just selling stuff, right? And it was even more than just selling good stuff. And what I saw was that there were some brands that were contributing to their best customers' lives in meaningful ways, not just about providing products, as good as they may be. And so, I set about kind of reverse engineering some of the brands that I really admired. And what I came to the conclusion that these great brands were built on the foundation of a single meaningful idea. Like Apple, it's not just an apple, it's an apple with the bite taken out of it. It's the creator. Nike it comes from the Greek goddess Nike, the winged goddess of victory. That's all about winning. So, long story short, is about delivering something really meaningful to your people. And it means that you have to be fearless. You have to be precise in defining who you are and what you do and who you're for. And what I saw was that so many businesses were not doing that. They were trying to be all things to all people.
Yeah, as clients, and being able to say no definitively to some client, some piece of work that doesn't necessarily fit your desired profile is super hard oftentimes, especially for professional service firms, professional service providers like me. You really get into the dearth mindset. There's not enough out there, and I need to get everything, because if I say no to this, then I won't get the next thing that I actually do want, perhaps. And one of the things, in fact, we hired you. Towne Advisory hired you to go through some of our branding, and it's helped quite a bit. We can talk about that in a second. But at the end of the day, I will say one of the big takeaways that that engagement helped us with was that even though we can say no to quite a few things, it's not that we're saying no to literally everything else other than what we want to be known for. It's that we still do quite a range of work, but at the same time, we have a market positioning that we are solid behind, and that helps take us to where we want to go and to be known for something. And in our case, that's uh, great exits are built trademark, uh, because that's what we want to be known for. So thank you for the help.
Yeah, you're welcome. So you said a lot of things. I mean, one is um, courage to say no, and courage to really define exactly what's right. And where I run into fear-based thinking and acting is when firms don't declare exactly what's right
Mhm.
because they want to leave more doors open. And so what ends up happening is that their messaging is mushy because their market position is mushy. So you mentioned our engagement, and I don't know if you remember, but it started because you knew you were redoing your website, right? You needed to redo it. There were some visual issues, and you were in the process. And then you said, "Hey," because we were just friends before that, and you said, "Could you take a look at my copy?" And what I remember telling you is it, it wasn't precise, and it doesn't tell me the best client to refer to you. Who should I be referring to you? And what do you really do?
Mhm.
And it it also revealed um, the fact that you wanted to do more, right? You were kind of pigeonholed in a way.
Mhm.
Um, and you wanted to establish your value in a more strategic way. Specifically, yes, you do valuations, but there was also a more strategic context where those valuations could live and more that you could do for your best clients. And that's how we developed the exit planning engagement
Mhm.
and storyline great exits are built.
It's kind of funny because in one instance we're saying that we collectively, and in our case, we're narrowing down our focus, but it's really just narrowing down what we say to the world and who we're saying it to. It's not that because, as you said, I was feeling pigeonholed into valuation, whatever that whatever anybody else thought that meant. And so, in order to help us refine the discussion and the messaging, we had to figure out, well, what does valuation mean to me, really, and the strategic application to our best clients and how that works and how that helps. And us getting clear on our messaging and on, well, really our brand, really let us amplify it much better. Because if you're just kind of shouting, "Hey, we do valuation, we do valuation, we do this, we do that," and you're shouting it to everybody, it has very little impact. It's very diffuse.
Mhm. It was also commoditized,
True.
right? I think when one as we went through the engagement, one of the key things we discovered was the market saw valuation as a more commoditized offer. There was a definite ceiling on the prices you could charge, and it was just a very narrow offer, right? Like my
It
pipe is
felt narrow.
leaking, you're gonna tighten up that pipe and it's not gonna leak anymore. Boom, you're out.
Right.
Versus a more comprehensive approach to understanding and defining and building the value of a business
Hmm.
and putting that valuation into context. And so when we went through, so I asked you to go through your various clients and tell me stories and really define where did you deliver the most value, what were the best engagements for you historically, and then create a vision for the kind of work that you wanted to do. And so that really is an essential component of branding, right? Not every brander who's kind of sits in my chair does it that way. But I think about branding as a way to express your highest value to your best client. And until we went through that process, I think it wasn't 100% clear how you could serve your best clients.
Right. Or to use the fish in water metaphor, it was too clear. We couldn't see it, and therefore we couldn't articulate it well to that best client. What is it that you should be asking from us? And what should we be providing to you so that you get the maximum value out of what we're doing with you? Because that's the thing. Uh, we were talking about benefits that our clients were already getting, but they had to get to us first. And so the big change is that our branding and marketing is doing more, being focused, is doing more to pre-educate, pre uh, filter, if you will, but more from the standpoint of pre-align us with the clients, pre-align the clients with us, so that everybody understands the scope of the value that everybody's going to bring to each other.
There's a few things that I see when I work with professional services firms. Sometimes they need more clarity. They need to define their target market more precisely. They need to define their engagement in a new way, which is what we did when we kind of figured out. Like I didn't figure out what Exit Builder was. You defined it, but I coached you through defining it, and then we
Yep.
named it.
Yep.
Um, and then other times, even if a firm has a good amount of clarity about those things, they need a more powerful story, right? Like they're talking about the right things, but they're talking about it in a boring way, and so they're not connecting, right? So
Andrew.
I think you need both. And so, are you finding that even just that language? Because the thing that I liked about Exit Builder was, or the idea about great exits are built is there's an aspiration there, right? I mean, you're pouring your life into something, but it's also that exit's not going to get handed to you on a platter, right? So it's kind of there's a natural segue between what that client wants and the core of what you do.
Yep. There's still a little bit of work to be done. You guys are close to the end, but don't give up quite yet, or don't throw in the towel quite yet, because we got something to do still. And it's based on everything that you've already done, yeah, to date, making a good business, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Um, when One of the things that I thought was really great when we did our engagement was, yeah, I came to you as, like you said, as a friend. Okay, can you check out this real quick? Check out the content that I'm going to put on this new website. And you had some notes, which were totally relevant and accurate. But I think there's a lot of times that people get worried about that, where you have this, string of the sweater, and if you give it to a professional who really knows what the hell they're doing, like you, they pull the string of the sweater and the whole thing unravels because it wasn't really well put together in the first place. And so one of the things I really appreciated about how we worked together, don't worry, it's going somewhere, is that we took it really in manageable steps at a time, such that it wasn't like, hey Ben, let's do this thing. Let's, do full rebrand, and because we're a small business, it's not like I had a $100,000 budget just to plunk down on the table and have you go nuts on. And that would be wonderful for everybody involved, but that's not our reality that I live in, at least. So being able to tranche that up, and we already trusted each other, but also really see the progress of the results come in at each stage was super super helpful for a smaller business like me, such that did end up doing kind of not a full rebrand, but a very comprehensive study of our brand value and how we went about deploying that. So, did you have a question for me?
If relevant, you want to talk about what you remember coming out of each phase? I mean, I don't like to tell a client, like, here's what it should be, right? The process reveals the right answer, right? So first we looked at
Right.
what your engagements were historically, and we rated all your clients. Who's an A, who's a B, who's a C, what was great about the A's, what was still maybe lacking from the A's, where could you
Hmm.
see adding more value, defining that vision. So that's kind of the first piece. Then we talked
Hmm.
about your values. We talked about your work, what it is, what it isn't, what's included, exactly who the kind of clients were. And that was actually quite a bit of work because you have two
Hmm.
sides to your business, right?
Hmm.
And you were focused more on valuations, more on founders who have kind of built their business brick by brick. Your partner was more focused on outsourced accounting, more for venture backed firms, and how do we bring those kind of two different types of typical clients for both of your practices together under one brand.
Hmm.
And so that's where we found the thing that everybody has in common was they wanted a great exit. Um, and so I feel like it kind of revealed itself step by step.
Sometimes a step forward and sometimes a step back. It wasn't linear compared to the efforts put in, and it was difficult. But that was just because I think in our case, we had a particularly intractable situation. I mean, that we totally, eventually busted through and figured out. Uh, but you do have to take it step by step, and it's not like you just give Robert some information and he comes up with the brilliant thing. It's a team effort all the way, because it has to be something that is specific to the firm. What is it that that firm provides that is of unique branded value? Um, So, I mean, speaking of brand and brand value, when we're question to you, when we're talking about the elements of a brand, what are the components? How does that contribute to the enterprise value of a business, particularly a professional services business?
Yeah. So so a brand is one way to think about it is the way you tell your story to the market such that the market knows you for a particular thing, right? They associate you with a certain type of client as a certain type of problem. You deliver a certain service, and that delivers a certain type of value. And what I often see is that if a firm has been around for a while, the principal or the senior people, maybe they do what they do, and it is like, to use that fish in water example, they're just kind of going through what they do organically. And what a brand does is it sets you up to win, so that if somebody doesn't know very much about you, before you get to that meeting, that first meeting, where you have to decide, is there a fit? A strong brand would convey to that prospect, you're really talking to me like I'm supposed to be here, or I'm not. I have the problem these guys are good at solving,
Mhm.
and I understand what I'm going to get, and I see the case studies and the proof points so that I already understand these people are the real deal. I don't have to have you explain that to me when we sit down, which in a biz dev context could take a while. It could take an hour.
Mhm.
It can take an hour and a half if somebody says, "Hey, what are you all about?" Whereas if you've defined a strong brand and that is mostly clear to the prospect before the conversation ever happens,
Mhm.
then the seller, the owner or the senior person at the professional services firm, can spend time focusing on the prospect
Mhm.
because they've already established that position of expertise and that communication of value before before the live conversation ever
Mhm.
happens. It happens in advance. And so what that means is that, usually the kind of clients that I work with, they know they're at the top of their game. And often there is some level of frustration or at least desire. Like we want to be working with better clients, more lucrative clients, more substantive engagements. And we're not quite getting that traction. And so the brand is your ability to define that expertise so that the right people see, you can really help us. And so when that happens over and over again, so I'm getting to the nuts and bolts answer to your question. When that happens over and over again, it impacts revenue, it impacts average client engagement size, it impacts profitability. And so when you've got new engagement over new engagement that's bigger, that's more profitable, then the firm becomes a different beast. It becomes a more valuable beast.
Mhm. Hey, everybody, I want to take a second here to share something about who we are and why we make this show. You're probably here because either you or a client of yours is thinking about buying or selling a business, bringing in investment, or planning an eventual exit. And that is why we call this show Max Value. We provide you with information and insights about how to maximize the value of your business. Our team at Towne Advisory guides business owners through the crucial, often once in a lifetime opportunity to exit their business. We use our trademarked Exit Builder program to help business owners prepare early, protect the value they've built, and obtain maximum value through an exit. And the secret is, our clients define what value means to them. Taking the right steps now can make all the difference in creating a successful outcome for yourself, your family, and your work team. If you think you're ready for the next step in understanding and increasing the value of your business, make a comment, send me a message on LinkedIn, or send me an email. All those links are in the show notes. It makes your marketing spend, to whatever extent you do, much more effective. Now, you have to be good at what you do. Like you said, you have to be at the top of your game in order to make sure you get that either repeat client or the client retention and the client satisfaction overall. But again, they have to get in the door first. They have to talk to you first, and having that positioning conversation, which I've always had with clients, but that didn't happen until I was talking to them live rather than them already having 2 or 3 touch points through strong branding, either, website, podcast, whatever. Actually, not even whatever, usually firstly through the, our center of influence that brings us in, the CPA or attorney or whomever needs to know our strong branding so that they can make the right connections and kind of communicate that ahead of time with the referred client. So
Right.
again, it's the third or fourth time a lot of times that the client is actually seeing some of the same story and language before they even talk to us, so that we can kind of get to the next stage quicker and easier. And people who find our branding, off to them, they don't like it, then we never get to that call, which is also fine. I mean, they self-select, no big deal. Not that I know, we wouldn't know, but
Yeah, right. So I think you made a really good point, though, which I hadn't touched on. The brand is just as important, if not more important, to your referral sources, to those centers of influence, because in crowded competitive categories, that referral source needs to understand who are you a good fit for and why should they refer Towne Advisory when they have so many different options. And
right,
that is the job of the brand, is to answer that question. Why should we choose you when we have so many other options? And I really believe that the answer to that, if you say because we're better, that is not a good answer. I think you have to be much more specific and say, we're better if you've got a client that looks like this. If you've got a client that's
mhm,
a valuation firm or an expert led firm, and you're a certain size and you have certain problems, and you get really narrow and really specific, not so narrow that there's no market for you, but just narrow enough that there's enough of a market, but you're not trying to be all things to all people. And that's really what the brand does, is it just it just accelerates those conversations so that clients can recognize themselves in that brand, and referral sources have a really clear idea of like who you're for and what you're really great at. And a lot of firms don't do that. They're just too broad, too vague.
and the interesting thing and very, very important thing for me to realize through that process, and I kind of alluded to it before, is that just because we are positioned and branded in a certain way to highlight our strengths, it doesn't mean that we don't do other work. Although a lot of times we're doing that other work kind of with that perspective. So, for example, we do a lot of estate and gift valuation, but at the same time, that certainly can be and often is part of an exit plan, certainly is something to be thought of in your life cycle, in your business life cycle as well, as to, well, what are we going to do with this business? So it's really just having for me personally, a very slightly different perspective on things we were doing already and still maintain doing, and that are very important to our business, but we are still making it within the context of the overall brand and market positioning.
Hmm. Yeah. You have the choice. I mean, I always tell clients, you always have the choice of whether to say yes or no to a certain prospect,
Right.
right? Even if they may not be the exact match for what you may be articulating in your brand positioning. But there's kind of two ways to think about it. Like you can either go really broad and then everybody fits,
Right.
or you can go narrow and then you can say, okay, I can see how this can work. We're going to take that client, or we get to say no. And so it's really just about being intentional about what your best work is, who your best clients are,
Right.
and putting that out in the world and telling a story about it.
That's right. Uh, were there any examples? I mean, we've kind of gone through my firm as an example, but are there any other examples that you really like telling, anecdotes that you really like telling in order to illustrate what the heck you're talking about, that are, through metaphor, through analogy, through somebody else's pain and suffering, somebody can learn something.
Right. Well, you mentioned how branding makes your marketing work harder, and that really is, that's the driver. So I've had clients. We've talked about my client Marjorie Heinrich. She's a personal injury lawyer. She's really amazing human, amazing lawyer, and she came to me a number of years ago and said, "I'm seeing competitive firms win these really big cases, like the top cases. And I know that we have more expertise than they do. So why are they getting those cases when we're not? And she was investing in marketing. She had this happens a lot in law firms. They have SEO driven, but SEO is search engine optimization,
Right.
SEO driven marketing plans. And what we saw was she had an amazing story to tell, but her marketing wasn't telling it because they were telling a very generic story that was
Mhm.
kind of templatized, and everything that her agency was saying about her firm could easily be said about other firms. So
Right.
we completely revamped her story. She had been a defense attorney before she was on the plaintiff side, and it became a modern day retelling of David and Goliath. Her brand is "We Will Be Your Warriors," and we're just taking her best prospects from where they are seriously injured and they need a warrior to fight giant insurance companies and municipalities and public entities and huge corporations. And her firm was the firm that knew how to be a giant slayer. And just that, it wasn't so much that in her case, in her firm's case, that they were doing something all that different. It's that we identified the underlying meaning and we told the story differently. And it made a huge, huge difference in her ability to get traction with the seriously injured people who had the really, really big cases.
Mhm.
And just in the last year, I mean, it takes a while to get the traction, but just in the last year, she's closed, dramatically bigger cases, a wrongful death case, just really really big multi-million dollar cases
Mhm.
um, that she was able to do. She described it as a 1-2 punch. Like, you have to have that story. That's your first punch. Then you've got to be able to communicate your expertise to the
Right.
client in that biz dev, in that initial call. And so having the story and the expertise combined has made a dramatic difference in her ability to attract the clients that she really wanted.
Oh, I love metaphor. So one-two punch really works for me. I mean, you jab, and that's not what's gonna win you the round, but it lets people know you're there, and then your second punch ends up being a little bit heavier. The Another thing that you had said was with Marjorie, and in my case as well, it really goes to identifying what the unique value is of the firm as opposed to just the person. And that's very, very difficult and important for small professional service firms, in particular. And yeah, most of our clients still come through personal referral, or referral to the one of the principals. But at the same time, her firm, is known to be good at a certain thing, and it's much more easy for, I think, potential clients to understand and believe that the firm as a whole can deliver on a certain brand promise rather than just a person. So it really is transforming that personal goodwill to entity firm level goodwill, which means basically, in addition to all the good things that you were talking about, more revenue, more margin, but there are things like, lower key person risk, because you should be able to have somebody succeed you into your business and have it be much more seamless, because now you're still that firm that can do this thing, and it's much more transferable, that goodwill. So
Yeah,
that's part, really the biggest part of how branding affects saleable goodwill, at least from my perspective. I don't know if you have another
right,
perspective you want to add to that.
right. Well, I agree with you, right? When it comes to valuing a firm, I think about it as embedding, when you define that brand, both the story and the firm's way, right? When you
Right.
embed that in the firm as opposed to only in the founder and the owner, right?
Mhm.
then you're putting more value into the firm. I have learned over time it's really a dance, right? Like that firm owner has to decide what's really important when it comes to being that key person for clients,
Yep.
and how do they want to invest in developing their team. And there's no one right answer, right? Like you can say, I want to develop, I want to hire and develop people who have the ability to be a certain way, right? Not just like do a certain type of work, but they can
Mhm.
embody um, attributes that are essential to that firm. And some, like a lot of times, I talked about Marjorie. She had spent 20 years as a senior criminal, not criminal, insurance defense attorney before she went to the plaintiff side. I have
Mhm.
another firm owner who's in trust in estates who was uh, he was a senior person at one of the big banks, advising high net worth firms. Not everybody that person hires is necessarily going to have that background,
Mhm.
and so you learn a lot through your life experiences, through your professional experiences, and some of that you can teach, and some of that is just a lived experience. So you really have to decide you know how you want to implement that strategy. So I used to say, like, oh yeah, that's the goal, you got to embed it in the firm. Sometimes that's a reasonable goal, and sometimes it's not.
That's fair. That's fair. In particular, as teams get smaller and, there's sometimes less of a pyramid underneath that may be less of an issue. Um, uh, by the way, I wanted to take a real quick pause and say that two things. You offer a what you call a brand strength assessment, and I think I can go ahead and offer that to everybody else out there. How would they get that?
On my website, bottom of the homepage. And so it's quite simple. It's 12 statements, and you self assess on a scale of 1 to 10. And it starts with commitment, right? Like, do you want to grow? Do you want to attract a different caliber of client to your business? Because what I see is that if we start with a low level of commitment, we could do a ton of work and it's probably not going to work. Like,
Well, and I would say, look, a lot of those surveys. I mean, I have a survey about exit planning as well, and a lot of them can feel like they're designed just to make you feel bad about yourself because you're doing a horrible job at exit planning or branding or whatever it is. But I really liked your brand strength assessment because if you actually did give it some real thought, it did open my eyes to a few things. And yes, after I got over being depressed for a little bit, then I could do something about it. Uh,
right. Yeah. The intention is not to make you depressed. The intention is just look at how it's working. I mean, it's like anything else, your personal finances, your health, your whatever. You first, you just have to take an honest, uh, provide an honest sense of what's really going on.
yep.
And, everybody in professional services is in sales. And we know if there's no pain, if everything is fine, then you likely don't need help. And
Right.
so it's got to start with a sense of, well, could something be better? Do you
Uh,
want something like a better client that is worth your while to invest in improving something to get those better clients? Maybe it's your brand, maybe it's not, right? So depends
right.
on what
And
you
I
want.
think And I think you brought up, a really important point. This comes up with, exit planning. It comes up with, building your brand, whatever it is that, especially when things are fine and things are mostly fine most of the time, right? when things are fine, it feels like that you're possibly paying money and putting in effort in order to risk fine, hopefully for something better. And so I know a lot of your clients, and actually even my clients, have to be pretty have to be convinced that there is not as much risk to it as they think usually. Also, that there really is a payoff at the end of, well, why are we going through all of this? Because it's not a well, some of it's fun. It's not a truly fun process to peel open your brand and really try to dig in there. What what is your heartbeat, and try to get some graphic metaphor in there. But basically, it's not that fun in a lot of ways. It's very revealing, but at the end of it, after all that effort, some pain, some money, there's a point to it. And it does make an impact on not just my daily operations. Uh, I do get a lot of people that say, "Hey, I saw that post or I saw this and it was effective." But it also has that end game effect of, well, now there's more value built into the business entity, and it's not just the Ben show or the Allen show. It's the firm as a whole has a more of an identity. And even though you're going to have your own culture anyway, now we're telling what that culture is. Now we're saying how we deliver and who we deliver for and what that's all about. And that's it's delivered through marketing, but it is the message itself is the brand. So that's been extremely helpful for just my clarity.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One is you have to, I really feel like you have to want something more, right? Like that good enough isn't really good enough,
Right.
because if you know you're at the top of your game and you're playing a solid, kind of B plus level game, but you know you're really an A player, you have to decide how much is that fire in the belly, that's going to take you from doing pretty good to what you're capable of. I mean, I think that's one part of it. Another piece of it, like in your case, you were ready to do that work anyway, right?
Yeah.
You were in the process of doing it. And that's what I see is a lot of firms are doing the marketing. They're
They're
doing all the
trying.
right things. They're trying, they're spending their time. Maybe they're networking, maybe they're spending money on marketing, maybe they're hiring an agency. And you said you like metaphors. I use this metaphor of bikes on a bike path, right? Like you could be on that old school beach cruiser and having like a totally fine ride down the bike path, and you're getting somewhere. It's not like you're stuck. But
Hmm.
you could also be on a finely tuned Tour de France racing bike, and you could be putting in the same caliber of pedal stroke and getting so much further. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how our engagement started, because I saw what you were like. You were starting to ride on that beach cruiser,
Headline like crazy.
and there was so much more potential in terms of how you positioned yourself and what you could say.
Hmm.
So if you're going to do that work, if you believe in marketing at some level, even just biz dev, and if your brand is just okay but not really fine tuned, you're doing the work anyway, but you're not getting as far.
All right, Robert. I think we've gotten some really awesome stuff out of this. But before I let you go, I want to do a couple of get to know you questions. So
Now,
tell me something that's not on your LinkedIn profile.
well, a couple of things. I'm a dancer. And so I don't know if you knew that. I do a dance called the West Coast Swing, which is super, super fun. Sometimes people refer to it as modern swing. So if you Google West Coast Swing, you'll see lots of cool examples. And related to that, because I have been hosting a dance, I founded a nonprofit which is I work with the city of Oakland. I lease this incredible WP era, beautiful, beautiful building built in the 20s with these great ballrooms. And our nonprofit leases individual spaces to dance programs so that instead of this great building being dark evenings and
Hmm.
weekends, it can be used by these community dance programs. So that's what's
No,
not on my LinkedIn.
gotcha. Maybe it should be. So next up, what we're always trying to improve ourselves one way or the other. I do it through reading. What are you reading these days?
So one book that comes to mind is there's a guy who's really smart. His name is Blair Enns, and his mission is to transform the way creative and marketing is sold. So he's got this brilliant book called The Win Without Pitching Manifesto. He wrote that a number of years ago. He's got a new book out called The Four Conversations. And it's this very systematic way of looking at the steps and the stages of conveying your expertise to a prospect and then setting up the sale so that you really identify what the real value that's going to be created is, and you're able to present the options in a really strategic way so that you can maximize the value of that sale. So anyway, that's what I'm reading. It's called Four Conversations by Blair Enns.
Awesome. Okay, that I believe I've heard of that one. I'll have to pick that up.
Yeah, it's a great book.
So, lastly, then we'll put it in the show notes, of course. But how can people get a hold of you, assuming you want to be gotten a hold of?
Absolutely. Easiest way, my website, fearlessbranding.com. And you can find my email and my contact information there. And I'm
Very good.
easy to find on LinkedIn, Robert Friedman, Fearless Branding.
Awesome. Well, everybody, don't be afraid to reach out to Robert. He is, I don't know, he's just brilliant. He's a creative genius on branding, and I've really enjoyed working with him personally. Nobody paid either one of us to to say any of the nice stuff, but it's all true. All right, thank you very much for joining me, Robert.
It's been a pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap. You've been listening to Max Value Podcast. And if this episode provided any interesting information, hit that subscribe button, smash like, and drop a comment below. I'm Ben Towne with Towne Advisory, and I'll catch you next time.